Welcome to episode 20 of the PS We Expire podcast. I'm your host, Morgan Motzinger, and today we are having a hard conversation. No, scratch that. We are having a conversation about how to have hard conversations, how to have difficult conversations with your spouse, with your employer, with your employee, with a family member, with your child. There's a 7-part structure that I want to share with you when it comes to how to have hard conversations. If you're anything like me and you are highly conflict avoidant, these will be extraordinarily helpful to you as you seek to develop deeper connections with the people in your life that you care about. So thanks for joining me for this episode of the PS We Expire podcast. And before we get into the podcast, will you do me a favor? Head over to wherever you're listening to this on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, whatever, hit the subscribe button and leave a review. It's just a great way for more people to get their eyeballs and earballs on the podcast. So thanks for joining me today for this episode, and I'm so glad that you're here. I hate confrontation, hate confrontation. I hate anything that even feels mildly confrontational, which means that I have gotten into a really great habit of just stuffing down a lot of the things that I feel. Whether it's like somebody sharing something that I really don't agree with, or when it comes to like voicing my needs that maybe will put somebody out, I tend to just err on the side of keeping it all to myself, which creates all sorts of problems. One of the biggest problems is that it creates a deep sense of disconnection from the people in my life. Because if I'm not ever actually showing somebody something that's important to me, or a need that I have, or something that I don't agree with, something that I don't like, I mean, what am I doing? I'm not creating really deep, meaningful, authentic connections with people because I'm hiding part of who I am. Confrontation, though, or conflict, or anything that even seems remotely like conflict, feels so yucky. For many, many people. I know that I'm not alone in this. It feels yucky for many, many people, and so we will just avoid it. So what I want to share with you today are just some helpful tips on how to have hard conversations, how to have difficult conversations. Now, these conversations could be with your kids. These could be with your spouse or your partner. This could be with an employee or an employer. This could be with a family member or a friend. Hard conversations are just part of life. And if we go through life just avoiding them, again, we're missing out on really deep connections with people. So I just want to share with you 7 B's today that will help you navigate hard conversations. Some of them have to do with the actual art of having the hard conversation, and some of them have to do with what to do with your internal stuff that comes up when you know you need to have a hard conversation and when you're actually having the hard conversation with someone. So these are 7 B's, as in be present, be whatever. So I will share those with you. But first I want to tell you about, I'm taking a math class right now. So I am in my first year back in college, and I'm taking a math class, much to my chagrin, because math is not my strong suit. However, I will say, my teacher shared something really insightful on the first or second day in class. I think it was the first day in class. And not only was my mind a little bit blown when it comes to understanding mathematical concepts, but I was like, hold the phone. These are really, really powerful insights into relationships. So the first thing that he shared with us is that you have to know what the problem actually is. So if you are dealing with a word problem, for instance, you have to understand what the word problem is actually asking you to solve. You have to be really clear on what the mathematical problem is that you're trying to find an answer to. So in relationship, you have to be really clear on what the problem is so that you can solve it. You can't be ambiguous about what the problem is. You got to be really clear on what you are trying to solve. And then the second piece that he said is if you have a really big problem that you cannot, it's not really clear how to solve it, what you can do is reduce it down to a smaller problem and find the pattern within that solution that you can apply to a bigger problem. So what this would show up as is one of the questions on our math homework was if you have a 100 by 100 chessboard and you're trying to figure out how many squares of every size are on that chessboard, every 1x1, 2x2, 3x3, 4x4, etc. If you wanted to figure out how many squares of any size were on that chessboard, that's a really big problem to try and solve. So what you do is you shrink it down to a 3x3 chessboard and you solve that. A 4x4 chessboard and you solve that. A 5x5 chessboard and you solve that. And what you're doing is looking for the patterns on how to find the answer to that question. Once you find the pattern, you can apply it to the bigger problem. So this is where it's so exciting to think about how this applies to our relationships, is that many, many, many times we think that the problem in the relationship is enormous, because that's often how it feels, especially if it's a problem that we have not addressed for a really long time. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger in our minds. And you see all of the ways that that one problem is impacting other areas of your life. And it just feels enormous. But what you can do is you can reduce it down to figure out what the smaller problem is that you're actually working on, or maybe like several smaller problems that you want to address, and then use the ways that you have not only addressed those smaller problems to apply to a bigger problem, but you're also finding and noticing the patterns in your relationship, in your communication styles, in the way that you solve problems with that other person. You can apply that to the bigger problem. Most of the problems that we're trying to solve in our relationships have to boil down to how we're really feeling about something. So, okay, I won't get into that yet, because that is one of my B's that I'll share with you in a moment. But these two applicable insights into, my math class of you have to understand what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And then also, if you have a big problem, reduce it to a smaller one and look for the patterns that help you solve that big problem. So just a little insight from my math class that I thought was such a profound way to think about problems in our relationships. So when we are talking about conflict that we want to resolve or address in relationships, again, this could be in any of your relationships. A lot of what I'm talking about does kind of go through the lens of someone that you, another adult, someone that is in your life that you want to solve these problems with. So that's going to be the first B, which I'll get into a second. But this can be about things like household expectations. This can be things like bills, chores, child duties, medical decisions. These can be conversations about sex. These can be conversations about your finances, difference in beliefs and values, how you're raising your children, etc. These conversations could be ones that you are having with your children, like household rules, or conversations about not sex with them. That sounds messed up, but you understand what I'm saying. Conversations with your children about sex and sexuality. These can be conversations about discussing changes that they need to make in their life. These can be conversations with your employer or employee. So when expectations are not being met or are unrealistic, these can be conversations that you want to have about things that they are unrealistic expectations that they have for you within your job. This can be when they're asking you to do things that are outside of the scope of work that you've agreed to. This can be things around, paid time off or getting a raise. So these conversations about how do we actually broach difficult topics with people, difficult conversations with people, everything that I'm sharing with you, these 7 B's that I'm going to share with you, are usable in any of these contexts. Now, the first thing really that I want to say before I get into the B's is that there is no way to avoid how uncomfortable it actually feels in your body. So I think probably all of you know what it feels like to know that you need to have a hard conversation and that you just cannot muster up the courage to have it, to actually physically say the words that you need to say to start the conversation. So just know that it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to start to have these conversations. But at some point, you will get to your limit on keeping it to yourself, and you will find that you can't not have these conversations anymore. So hopefully some of this preparatory work through asking these questions of yourselves and going through these B's will help you just be really clear and more confident going into these hard conversations so that you can communicate your needs and that you feel like you have a resolution to them. So, number 1, be choosy. Okay, do you actually care to solve this problem with this person? Are you picking random fights with random strangers on the internet because you have built up resentment and lack of clear communication and problem solving in your real life? Be choosy. Do you actually care enough about the relationship with the other person to have this kind of conversation with them? Do they actually impact your daily life? Do you want to solve this with them, or are you just feeling like you need to spout off to them and say what you need to say? So the number 1 B is be choosy. Does that person actually matter enough in my life for me to say something about this, to bring this up or not? Okay, so number 2 is to be introspective. Are you outsourcing your inner work to someone else? Are you expecting them to do the heavy lifting of making you feel better? So part of being introspective is that you're not asking anyone else to do the work to dig deeper beneath the surface level of what you're feeling like you need to address with them. For instance, let's say that I am feeling really upset at my husband and I haven't done the work to really understand why. If I am not being introspective and I am just coming at my husband with my fury or my upset about something, but I haven't done the work to understand where all of that emotion is stemming from, then I'm outsourcing that responsibility onto him. That's not fair. So be introspective. Do the work beforehand, before you get into these conversations. Do the work of digging beneath the surface underneath how you're feeling about things and gain some clarity there. So number 3 is be clear. Do you know what problem you're actually trying to solve? You have to do the pre-work, like I said in the previous one, be introspective, but you have to do the pre-work to understand what needs you're trying to communicate. So what you need to do ahead of time before you ever start to broach a conversation with someone is that you need to define what you actually want to accomplish in that conversation. And don't be vague about it either. Don't think, oh, the thing that I'm clear about is that I want to have a better relationship with this other person. Okay, well, that's not really a clear objective. If you're not clear about the problem that you're trying to solve and what outcome you actually want to have from the conversation, then you're just going to get into a muddly mess and you're not going to actually be able to look at the problem together and solve it together. So be clear ahead of time what problem you're actually trying to solve. Okay, number 4 is be focused. So in the previous step, as I'm saying, be clear about what you're trying to get. You need to make sure that when you're in conversation with someone that you are being really focused on that particular problem. So I think what can happen pretty easily is like you come to someone with one problem, but secretly you have 10 other problems that you're wanting to address. And so you use the one smaller problem as like the gateway drug to all of the other problems that you have been thinking about and ruminating about. So it'd be like, if I want to talk to my husband about like needing help with household chores or something, and I'm talking specifically about, I don't know, I'm pulling this out of thin air, but like yard work, okay? But secretly, I want my conversation about yard work to be about all of the household responsibilities and priorities and expectations. And then I also bring into that our gender roles and our expectations in our marriage, blah, 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 blah. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like you can really easily snowball from that one problem into all the other problems. So what I'm suggesting here is that you need to stay focused on what that one clear outcome is that you are trying to accomplish in that conversation. Do not show how that problem is part of the bigger problems when you're in solve it mode with that person. So focus on solving the one problem together. Number 5 is be intentional. So you need to prep your partner for this conversation. I highly recommend that you tell them ahead of time that you have something that you would like to discuss with them, that it is going to take some time, and then find a time together that works for both of you. So, please don't do this like when they are heading out the door to work. Don't be like, hey, we need to have this big conversation that I have been thinking about for 6 months, and now we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about it. They're not going to be able to be fully engaged and focused and in deep conversation with you when their mind is already on a different track. So you need to prep them ahead of time that you want to have a conversation with them. Of course, let them know, I love you. We are in this together. I'm not going to try and like dump something on you. But to give them some time to mentally and emotionally prepare for having a conversation with you. Especially, I'll put this in here too, that this is really important in our friendships, that when we are needing some additional emotional support, just check in with the other person first and see if they have the capacity in that moment to work through and listen to some difficult things for you. So don't just automatically assume that the other person has the space, the mental and emotional space to be a sounding board for you or to listen intently to what you're saying. They might already have been maxed out through other things that are happening in their lives. So just check in with that other person before you unload on them. So when you're going to have a big conversation with the person that you have intentionally chosen to continue to build relationship with in your life, whether that's a friend, a parent, a spouse, whatever, be really intentional about what time you're having that conversation. Be aware of other things that are happening in their life and give them a heads up and give them some time to prepare to have that conversation with you. The next one is to be present. Be emotionally present when you're talking with them. Silence your phone. Listen to them, to their responses with the intention of understanding, not necessarily just to get your words in there. You also need to give time for the other person to process what you're sharing with them. It may be the first time that they're hearing this from you. And even if you feel like, good God, like I've shared this with them a billion times, this may be the first time that they're hearing it in the way that they need to hear it, and they're hearing it in a way that you actually are really clear with what you're trying to communicate. So going back up to the, one of the first ones is to be clear. Maybe you feel like you've said it a bunch of times, but you have never intentionally set aside time to talk about this one thing in a really clear way and ask for that person's help in coming to a solution. Maybe this is the first time you've done that. So be aware that they probably have not been thinking about it to the same degree that you have. If it is a big conversation that you're having with them, like one that is going to potentially require a pretty significant shift in your life, this is even more important. Okay, we're not talking about like conversations that are like, I don't like how you put the silverware in the dishwasher. You need to put it prongs down instead of prongs up. Okay, that's not this kind of conversation that I'm talking about. But when you're having a conversation with someone where, again, like if this is something that you have been thinking about for days, weeks, months, years, and you are just now addressing it with this person, you need to give them the time and be flexible enough in your communication with them that you are giving them the space to absorb and process what you're sharing with them. Do not demand a response necessarily in that moment. If this is a big conversation that you're having with them, break it down. Again, like if it's a really big problem, break it down into smaller problems that you can work on over time together. Along with this is really, really important for you to be calm and to validate their feelings. If you can be very, very present with whatever feelings are coming up as you are sharing this difficult insight, or feeling nervous, or feeling, like you're going to throw up because you're so uncomfortable with sharing some of those hard things with people. Be very, very present with how you're feeling and allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling and continue to calm yourself down. You can, while you're having conversations that are difficult, you can be practicing breathing techniques, breathing in 4 counts, breathing out 4 counts, while you're having conversation with them to keep yourself in a down-regulated state. So you don't want to be really high elevated in this conversation and continue to amp up the energy so that, maybe you guys get to the point where there's too much emotion there, too much anger, too much sadness, too much whatever, that you can't even talk with each other on a logical level anymore because you're just all hyped up into the emotion of it. So just continue to practice calming techniques as you are navigating these difficult conversations to keep yourself in a state of openness, in a state of communication, in a state of love and understanding as you share difficult news and validate the other person's emotions as they're processing what you're sharing with them. I took my kids, we took our kids on a hike not that long ago, and this hike that I thought was going to be a fairly easy, like maybe it was going to take us 30 minutes, 45 minutes, ended up being this incredibly steep and kind of scary hike where at parts there are ropes that you have to use to climb up these really steep parts. And our kids are 11 and 7. And our 11-year-old she is very adventurous, and she was like, no problem, this is fun, woohoo. I had to keep telling her, like, can you please navigate this part carefully because it's making me nervous. And our 7-year-old is much more contemplative. He is much he's very risk averse. He doesn't like doing big things like that. And at one point I had not done this hike before, but I was certain that we were almost at the top. And we were almost there, and he was maxed out. He had just hit his limit on his fear and the physical exertion required to do this hike. And he was really, really scared. And he just sat down and he was crying. And we kind of I watched my husband go through these different stages of trying to bargain with him, like, we're almost there, buddy, you can do it. And then it was like, we're really close to the top, like, you just have to get up and you have to do it. And it's kind of like going through all these ways to try and motivate the other person. We try to motivate him to get up and keep finishing the hike because we're like almost there. Eventually he did get up and keep moving, but he just kept crying, and he kept saying, how scared he was. And knowing that it was going to be a really difficult hike back down, I'm like, we're so close. We just have to get to the top and rest before we go back down. So we did. We just kept plugging away, and it really was literally just around the corner. We were at the top of it. So we're sitting at the top of this hike. It's a beautiful view. And immediately he is saying, I want to go back down. Why did you make me go on this hike? I'm so scared. I'm afraid. I am scared that I'm going to die. All of this stuff. And what I realized that in those moments, what he needed from me was to say back to him exactly what he was feeling. So I was sitting next to him, and I said, can I put my arm around you? And he said, yes, but not too tight, because he didn't want me to lose my balance and fall. I mean, it really was not that dangerous, but in his mind, his little 7-year-old mind, it was really dangerous. So I was, navigating what he said he felt comfortable with, what he felt safe with. And then he said, don't want to be on this hike. And I said, you don't want to be on this hike? And he said, I feel like I'm going to die. And I said, you feel like you're going to die? I am really, really scared. You're really, really scared. And after just a few minutes of doing that, I wasn't adding any additional commentary. I wasn't trying to put a positive spin on anything. I wasn't trying to talk him out of how he was feeling. I wasn't trying to logic with him to be like, you enjoyed the view, you made a good job, all this stuff. I just repeated back to him exactly what he said to me. After just a few minutes of doing that, he took a deep breath and his tears stopped. He still was afraid, and he was afraid as we were going back down, but it was a different feeling for him, because in that moment he knew that he wasn't alone. He knew that I had really heard him because I was repeating back to him exactly what he said. Okay, so why am I sharing this story with you? When it comes to difficult conversations, what all of us want in those moments, whether you are the person who has to have the difficult conversation or the person who is on the receiving end of difficult conversations, what both people are wanting in those moments is to be seen, is to be validated, is to be heard, and is to know that the other person is going to do their best to help meet the need that is being presented. This goes back to like why we have to be choosy about who we're deciding to have these difficult conversations with, because if there's no sense of a shared goal of deeper connection or resolution to a problem, you'll find out pretty quickly whether or not it's worth it to have that conversation. And in some of those situations, you don't really get to choose who you're having that conversation with. Like if you are an employee and you're having a conversation with your boss or whatever. But I would say like in your close relationships, when you've decided that it's worth it to have the conversations in service of continuing to foster deeper connection with that other person, that both of you just have to be aware of the underlying need and desire of both parties. When you can come to a difficult conversation with the belief about the best of the other person, then you can have, more often than not, you can have some type of resolution. So if I come to a conversation believing that my friend is a really wonderful person who has a deep desire for doing good in the world, who loves me, then from that place, from that premise, we can navigate difficult conversations in a way that is open and loving and honest. My tendency, I already shared this, but I'll share it again, that my tendency is to hide those parts of myself that potentially make other people uncomfortable, or it's just a way to protect myself, I think. And so some of my work has been to be honest about how I'm really feeling about things, what I really value, what I really believe about things, and to develop the skill of being okay with being uncomfortable. Because really, that's what this boils down to. The reason why we don't have difficult conversations is because we don't know how to be with our uncomfortable feelings. Ugh. We don't know how to be okay with somebody being mad at us. We don't know how to be okay with someone misunderstanding us. We don't know how to be okay with someone disagreeing with us. And the more that you become really clear on your own values and you become really clear on your needs and develop such a level of like self-trust and self-love that you know that it's worth it for you to pursue those things in your life, that you develop the skill of just allowing yourself to be uncomfortable sometimes, because the only other way to avoid that is just to numb yourself to life. And if you numb yourself to the hard things in life, you're going to numb yourself to the good things in life as well. You cannot selectively numb emotion. The more that you are able to be okay with sometimes just having to let shitty feelings move through your body, the more you will take on having the uncomfortable and difficult conversations that you need to have. So number 7 in the B's is be willing to get help. This may not necessarily be inviting someone to join in those difficult conversations. It may, if it's with your spouse, you might be inviting in, a therapist into those conversations. Or even, if you're doing therapy with your family, you're inviting a therapist in to help you navigate difficult conversations as a family unit. Or, if it's a difficult conversation with your boss, maybe it's somebody from HR. Even if you're not inviting someone into that conversation, you always have the option of learning from other people on how specifically to address those types of conversations with people. So you might be talking beforehand with a mentor. You might do some practice rounds of how to have that conversation. You might read articles or books on how to have those difficult conversations, or watch YouTube videos on how to broach difficult subjects with people in your life. So there are some really practical ways that you can invite help into your experience of having difficult conversations with people. What I also highly recommend doing is that you look into what exactly are your communication styles? What is your listening style? This goes back again to like number 2, which is be introspective. How well do you know yourself? Do you know typically how you respond in conflict? Do you understand what your patterns are? How can you become more of an observer of your behaviors within navigating difficult conversations so you can do something different next time if you're not getting the outcomes that you want? So the 7 B's, I'll go through them really quick here to sum up. Number 1 is be choosy. Number 2, be introspective. Number 3, be clear. That's probably one of the most important ones, is to be clear. Number 4, be focused. Number 5, be intentional. Number 6, be present. And number 7, be willing to get help. Having difficult conversations does not feel great. It does not feel good at all. But if you can learn, how to let the uncomfortable emotion move through your body and allow yourself to experience it, then deeper connection becomes possible because you will stop hiding who you really are. You will stop hiding what you really want. You will stop hiding what you really need. You will stop hiding, or you will stop avoiding the unrealistic expectations that you have placed on other people that you are not even aware of. You will stop hiding from your own responsibilities in your relationships. When you have difficult conversations with people, you are developing the ability to have deeper connections than probably you ever thought was possible. So, will you join me in having hard conversations? I know you can do it. It just takes some practice and a commitment to a full life, to all the human experiences that are available to you. So, thanks for joining me for this episode. And before we go, yes, we expire.